The sun hung low over the dusty town of Red Mesa, casting long shadows across the wooden facades of its weather-beaten buildings. Sheriff carts rattled over cobblestones, and a few weary townsfolk lingered on the boardwalks, half watching, half ignoring the life that had always seemed to follow its slow, predictable rhythm here. Into this quiet scene rode a lone cowboy, tall, lean, and sun-creased from years spent chasing wind and dust rather than people. He called himself Caleb Moore, though no one in Red Mesa had ever heard of him. That mattered little. Outlaws didn't care much for names, and heroes were always accidental. Caleb had been tracking the notorious bandit Silas Crow, whose crimes had grown bolder in the last month. Crow's latest spree had terrified not just Red Mesa, but the surrounding mesas, and for good reason. He had a penchant for striking at night, and more than once, townsfolk had woken to discover barns burned or horses stolen. But this time, Crow's audacity had reached a new height. He had kidnapped the youngest of the 4 Hartley sisters, a family of famed landowners in the valley, and now threatened to vanish into the desert with her. The eldest Hartley sister, Margaret, had come to Caleb personally that morning. Her eyes were sharp, but beneath her composure lingered a tremor that spoke of a storm barely contained. "Please," she had said, her voice steady but urgent. "You must find Lily before it's too late." Caleb had listened, tipping his hat, assessing the terrain with the practiced eyes of a man who trusted instincts over maps. There was little time for hesitation. Crow's trail led through rocky canyons, where shadows stretched like clawed fingers at sunset, and Caleb's horse moved with the surety of one who had ridden 100 desperate miles before breakfast. As he approached the canyon's mouth, Caleb's gaze fell upon a faint glimmer of white, the flutter of a dress against the ochre rock. He dismounted silently, crouching behind a jagged boulder. And there she was, Lily Hartley, the youngest, eyes wide with fright, bound but unharmed, sitting against a rock wall while Crow strutted back and forth, his pistol catching the dying sun. Caleb's mind raced. A head-on confrontation would be reckless. Crow was armed and merciless. But then, his hand found the hilt of his revolver, and he drew upon the most reliable weapon a man like him had: patience. He waited, silent as a shadow, until the wind carried Crow's boastful threats away from Lily's ears. Then, with a whisper like the rustle of dry leaves, Caleb sprang. In a flash, Crow's attention turned too late. His pistol a heartbeat behind Caleb's. The outlaw stumbled back, cursing, as Caleb disarmed him with a practiced flick. Lily scrambled up, blinking against the desert light, and for a moment the world seemed impossibly quiet. The danger had vanished almost as suddenly as it had arrived. "You're safe now," Caleb said, brushing dust from her dress. "Can you walk?" Lily nodded, though her voice caught in her throat. I think so." The ride back to Red Mesa was quieter. Lily clung to Caleb's side, but not from fear alone. The canyon's expanse had a way of humbling anyone, making even the bravest hearts feel small. As the town appeared on the horizon, Caleb felt a shift in the air, not the summer heat, but something heavier, something older. He had known the Hartleys only in passing, yet their family legacy carried weight beyond wealth or reputation. There was an unspoken law here, whispered through generations, binding actions and debts in ways a stranger could never fully grasp. That evening, under the lantern glow of the Hartley mansion, Caleb was greeted not just by Lily's tearful embrace, but by her sisters Margaret, Clara, and Rosal standing tall, their expressions a mixture of relief and unease. The eldest, Margaret, stepped forward with a solemnity that made even Caleb pause. "Cowboy," she said, her voice echoing in the grand hall, "you've done more than save a life tonight. You've fulfilled a duty that cannot be ignored. By the sacred law of our family, rescuing the youngest binds you to all 4 of us." Caleb blinked. He had expected gratitude, maybe gold, or a feast, but not this. "All 4?" he asked, feeling the weight of centuries-old tradition pressing against his ribs. "Yes," Margaret replied, unwavering. "It is our law. There is no exception. You have saved Lilino, you are bound." Caleb stared at the 4 sisters, the gravity of their words settling in like the dust after a desert storm. The room felt smaller, the lanterns dimmer. Adventure had led him here, as it always did. But the path forward was suddenly tangled with expectations older than the town itself. And somewhere in the quiet, Caleb realized that this was not the end of a story, but the beginning of something far more complicated. The evening air hung heavy with the scent of roasted meat and pine from the hearth, though Caleb could barely focus on either. He had ridden through scorching deserts, evaded gunmen, and faced a notorious outlaw. Yet nothing had prepared him for the Hartley family law. It was as if the Wild West had its own rules for justice, and tonight, Caleb had stumbled into one older than the Mesas themselves. Margaret Hartley, the eldest sister, remained by the hearth, her posture impeccable, her gaze unwavering. She had a commanding presence that drew every eye, her hair pinned back with a precision that reflected her meticulous nature. Beside her, Clara, tall, quiet, and contemplative, leaned against the doorway, her fingers tracing the edge of the wood as though she were deciphering the grain's secrets. Rose, the third sister, smiled faintly but never fully relaxed, her amber eyes flicking between Caleb and Lily, as if measuring how much he truly understood the law he had just become part of. And Lily, small and still trembling from her ordeal, hid part of herself behind the folds of her rescued dress, though her gratitude toward Caleb shone through in every glance. "Cowboy," Margaret began, her voice carrying a mixture of respect and stern warning. "Before you rest, you must understand what you have done and what it entails. The law of our family is not written on paper, but it is older than Red Mesa, older than the Mesas themselves. When the youngest is saved, the rescuer is bound to all four sisters. There is no negotiation." Caleb rubbed the back of his neck. He had encountered unusual customs before, land disputes that involved duels, towns that settled arguments with races across canyons, but this was unlike anything he had ever imagined. "And what exactly does bound mean?" he asked cautiously, trying to measure the weight of these words. "It means," Margaret said, her eyes glinting in the firelight, "that your life will henceforth be intertwined with ours. You will protect us, yes, but also honor each of us in ways that only time will define. It is a sacred trust, one that cannot be broken without dishonor." Clara stepped forward this time. Her voice was softer than her sister's, but there was a steel beneath it. "We do not expect you to understand immediately, Caleb. Few outsiders do. But understand this, our family law has endured centuries because it balances respect, duty, and loyalty. You have chosen, albeit unknowingly, to accept it." Caleb's mind whirled. His life had been one of freedom, of traveling from town to town, his only allegiance to his own code and his horse. Yet here he was, suddenly tethered to four women by an ancient law he had never heard of. He wondered if the desert winds themselves were testing him, or if fate had decided to complicate his simple life beyond repair. Lily, finally speaking, gave him a tentative smile. "It's not all doom and gloom," she said softly. "Yes, the law is unusual, but it also keeps our family together, keeps us safe. You've already proven yourself brave. That counts for something." Rose, who had remained silent until now, tilted her head. "You have spirit," she said quietly, almost a whisper. "Most who hear our law flee before they even understand it. You stayed. That's a rare quality in a man." Caleb felt a flicker of warmth. Perhaps it was relief. Perhaps it was admiration. Either way, it eased the tension knotting his shoulders. "I'll admit," he said with a wry half-smile, "I didn't exactly sign up for a lifelong contract with a family of four sisters when I left home this morning. But I did save Lily, and I reckon I can honor your law, as long as I understand it." Margaret nodded approvingly. "Understanding will come with time. For tonight, you will rest. Tomorrow, you must meet the council, the elders who enforce the law. Only then will your duties be clarified, and your bond officially recognized." Caleb lowered himself into the chair the sisters had offered, feeling the weight of the day in his bones. Outside, the desert wind whispered through the gaps in the wooden walls, a constant reminder that the world beyond Red Mesa had not changed, and neither had danger. But inside the mansion, surrounded by four sisters, each with her own quiet power, he felt something else, a strange mixture of anxiety, anticipation, and curiosity. He watched as the sisters prepared the evening meal, each moving with practiced grace and precision. Margaret arranged plates with the care of a general marshalling troops. Clara brought water from the spring nearby, her movements deliberate and calm. Rose set flowers on the table, small details that mattered more than any man could imagine. And Lily, still shy, helped quietly, learning the rhythm of her family once more. Caleb realized then that this was no ordinary family, and he was no ordinary cowboy. The law that bound him was not just about marriage or tradition, it was about trust, protection, and honor. And somehow, though the path ahead seemed impossible, he knew that the adventure was only beginning. As night fell over Red Mesa, Caleb Moore sat by the hearth, listening to the soft crackle of the fire. He had faced death and outlaws, but he had never faced something like this, the binding law of the Hartleys. And somewhere in that realization, he felt a spark of excitement. Whatever tomorrow held, it was bound to be extraordinary. The morning sun poured through the tall windows of the Hartley mansion, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny specters in the air. Caleb Moore awoke to the distant crowing of roosters, the smell of freshly baked bread, and an unmistakable tension that clung to the household like a second skin. Today, he would face the Hartley Counselor, gathering of elders, responsible for upholding the sacred law that now bound him to 4 sisters. Breakfast was a quiet affair. Margaret moved with her usual precision, serving each plate with silent authority. Clara poured water into Caleb's cup with deliberate care, while Rose arranged small sprigs of lavender from the garden to scent the room. Lily, still tentative, offered a soft smile as Caleb tasted the first morsel of bread. Despite the calm, there was an unspoken weight in the air. Every glance, every gesture seemed rehearsed, purposeful. He knew this was no ordinary family. This was a family with rules older than any law he had encountered in the West. Finally, Margaret spoke. Caleb, we will leave in an hour. The council awaits at the town hall. Be prepared to answer questions about your character, your intentions, and your understanding of our law. Do not take this lightly. The council's judgment is final. Caleb nodded, though the words made his stomach tighten. He had faced bandits, rattlesnakes, and desert storms, but an assembly of stern elders, judging his worth. That was a new kind of challenge. The town hall of Red Mesa was a modest wooden building, but inside, it bore the weight of generations. Portraits of Hartley ancestors lined the walls, their painted eyes seeming to follow Caleb as he entered. A long table stretched the length of the room, surrounded by elders whose faces were carved with lines of authority and experience. Some were older than the oldest building in town. Others were middle-aged, sharp-eyed, and clearly accustomed to enforcing their family's sacred law. Margaret introduced Caleb formally. Council members, this is Caleb Moore. He has rescued the youngest of the Hartley sisters, Lily Hartley, and is now bound by the sacred law. He stands before you to demonstrate his suitability to honor and uphold the law, as required. The elders studied him silently, their gaze heavy and piercing. Caleb swallowed. It was impossible to read their expressions. Some nodded minutely, others leaned back, steepling their fingers in contemplation. One elder, an old man with a snow-white beard and piercing blue eyes, finally spoke. Cowboy, he said, his voice low and resonant. The law of the Hartleys is not trivial. It demands loyalty, courage, and respect not only for the sisters but for the family as a whole. You have shown courage by rescuing Lily, but courage alone is insufficient. You must prove your character, your wisdom, and your willingness to accept responsibilities that few men could bear. Caleb cleared his throat. I understand, he said steadily. I may not fully understand your law yet, but I've never turned from a challenge before, and I don't intend to start now. Another elder, a woman with sharp features and dark hair tied in a braid, leaned forward. Character is revealed not just in deeds, but in understanding. Do you comprehend what it means to be bound to 4 sisters? Do you understand that each has her own expectations, her own needs, and her own power within the family? Caleb thought for a moment. He had noticed the subtle distinctions among the sisters: Margaret's commanding presence, Clara's quiet intelligence, Rose's meticulous care, and Lily's gentle but determined spirit. But understanding them all as part of a binding law was something else entirely. I will learn, Caleb said honestly. I may stumble at first, but I will not betray the trust you place in me. I will honor each of the sisters in the way they deserve. There was a long pause. Then the blue-eyed elder nodded. Your words are promising, Cowboy, but words are easily spoken. Actions will determine your place. We will observe you, test your judgment, and assess your loyalty over time. The law is not merely a contract, it is a living bond, maintained through deeds as much as words. Margaret spoke again. Counsel, Caleb understands the gravity. He will begin his service by assisting in the matters of our family estate and attending to obligations both here in Red Mesa and beyond. This is the first step in proving himself worthy. Caleb exhaled, feeling a mixture of relief and unease. The council had accepted him, but the true challenge was only beginning. Outside the hall, Red Mesa's streets carried on as if nothing had changed. Horses clopped over cobblestones. Shopkeepers shouted their wares, and children chased each other through the dusty lanes. Yet Caleb felt acutely aware that everything about his life had changed. As they left the hall, Lily ran up to him, her eyes shining. You did well, she whispered. They respect you now. But remember, they will test you in ways you don't expect. Rose caught his arm lightly. And don't think it will always be easy. The law protects us, but it also binds you. Be ready. Clara smiled faintly. We'll teach you. Slowly, you'll learn what it means to navigate our family. And perhaps even understand why the law exists. But first, you must adapt. Caleb glanced at the four sisters, each so distinct yet intertwined by bonds he was only beginning to comprehend. He realized that this was more than survival, it was an intricate dance of trust, respect, and honor, one in which a single misstep could reverberate through lives and legacy. As they returned to the mansion, Caleb knew one thing with certainty: the desert trails, the outlaws, and the open skies of the West had prepared him for danger. But nothing in his life had prepared him for the complex world of the Hartleys. And yet, he felt a spark of determination. If he could navigate the law, if he could earn their trust, he would prove himself worthy, not just as a cowboy, but as a protector of something greater than himself. The sun dipped low, casting the town in amber light, and Caleb Moore understood that his life had been irrevocably changed. The adventure had only begun. The first morning after the council meeting, Caleb Moore awoke to the quiet bustle of the Hartley mansion. The soft light of dawn filtered through the tall windows, catching dust particles that seemed to float in the air like tiny stars. He rubbed the sleep from his eyes, stretched, and realized that this would be his first day truly immersed in the complex world of the Hartley family. Breakfast was prepared with the precision of military routine. Margaret arranged plates with near-perfect symmetry, each dish measured and portioned according to habit and necessity. Clara moved with calm efficiency, serving water and making subtle adjustments to ensure comfort and order. Rose fussed over small details: the placement of napkins, the alignment of silverware, even the positioning of flowers on the table. And Lily, still shy but growing more confident, moved softly, learning the family rhythm while offering Caleb smiles that were both encouraging and curious. Caleb took his seat, silently studying them. He had always been a lone cowboy, relying on instinct and experience. But here, instinct alone would not suffice. He would need patience, understanding, and adaptability, qualities that the Hartleys had honed over generations. "Caleb," Margaret began, her voice carrying authority yet tinged with warmth, "today you will begin your first duties. This is not merely menial work. Each task will test your observation, judgment, and respect for our ways. Pay attention, for you will be judged not only by results but by the manner in which you act." Clara leaned forward. "I will guide you through the estate first. You must learn the land, the animals, and the responsibilities each sister entrusts to you. Observe carefully. Mistakes will teach you, but pride or haste may cost more than you realize." The first task was simple in theory: tending the stables. Caleb had known horses all his life, but these were no ordinary animals. They were prized for both strength and temperament, each trained for a purpose unique to the Hartley household. Margaret's stallion required patience and firm guidance. Clara's mare needed gentle reassurance. Rose's filly demanded precision, and Lily's young colt was unpredictable, full of energy and spirit, requiring careful handling. As Caleb worked, the sisters observed. Margaret approached him first, her gaze assessing. "Patience, Caleb. A horse will not respond to force alone. Understand it. Anticipate its needs. That is how you earn trust." Clara's approach was quieter but no less firm. "Notice the small details. The way it shifts its weight, the tension in its muscles. A sharp eye prevents accidents and demonstrates respect." Rose corrected his technique with meticulous care. "Your hands are too rough. Softness does not indicate weakness. It shows control. Learn the difference." Even Lily offered a tip, her voice soft but confident. "Don't forget to speak to them. They respond to tone as much as motion. Calm words can mean as much as a steady hand." Caleb realized that this was more than horse training. It was a test of observation, discipline, and empathy. Each sister taught a lesson that reflected her personality: Margaret's authority, Clara's intellect, Rose's precision, and Lily's gentleness. Each lesson was a piece of the law he was now bound by, and each demanded a different approach. By midday, Caleb was exhausted but enlightened. He had learned to anticipate the stallion's temper, soothe the mare, control the filly's energy, and connect with the colt. Each small victory earned nods of approval from the sisters, though the lessons were far from over. After the stables, Caleb accompanied the sisters on errands throughout Red Mesa. He learned that their law extended beyond the mansion walls. The townspeople respected, and even feared the Hartley family. Caleb witnessed the subtle ways the sisters exerted influence: Margaret negotiating a land dispute, Clara mediating a disagreement at the market, Rose arranging the sale of crops with exacting attention, and Lily comforting a frightened child. It became clear that being bound to the Hartleys was not simply about family duty, it was about upholding a legacy. Caleb's role was not passive. He was an active participant in the sisters' world, their protector, and a reflection of their honor. As evening fell, Caleb returned to the mansion, weary but thoughtful. The first day had tested him physically, mentally, and emotionally. Yet, he felt a spark of pride he had not failed. The sisters acknowledged his effort, each in her own way. Margaret with a measured nod, Clara with a faint smile, Rose with approving eyes, and Lily with a gentle touch on his arm. That night, as Caleb sat by the fire, he reflected on the lessons of the day. He had faced challenges before, dangerous outlaws, treacherous terrain, desert storms, but nothing had demanded such a combination of patience, insight, and humility. The Hartley Law was no mere tradition. It was a living test, shaping not only those bound to it but those who upheld it. Caleb realized that to survive, and to honor the sisters as promised, he would need more than courage or strength. He would need understanding, adaptability, and a willingness to learn from each sister's unique wisdom. Only then could he navigate the delicate balance of duty, trust, and respect that the Hartley Law demanded. As the fire crackled and the stars appeared over Red Mesa, Caleb Moore understood one simple truth. His life had changed forever. The road ahead was uncertain, full of trials he could not yet foresee, but he felt ready. For the first time in a long while, he was not just surviving, he was beginning a journey that could define him completely. The sun had barely crested the horizon when trouble arrived in Red Mesa. Caleb Moore was brushing down the horses when the first rumors reached the Hartley estate. Outsiders had been spotted near the northern ridge, armed and riding fast. Word spread quickly through the town. They sought the Hartley family, drawn by the tale of 4 sisters bound by an ancient law, and the cowboy who had dared to protect them. Caleb's hand instinctively rested on his holster. Danger was nothing new, but this was different. These men weren't after cattle or gold. They were after the sisters themselves, and by extension, him. He realized that the law binding him to the Hartleys also bound him to defend them, in ways far beyond simple household duties. Margaret emerged from the house, her posture rigid, eyes narrowing as she surveyed the distant ridge. "They come for us," she said simply, as though stating a fact rather than a threat. "Red Mesa respects the law, but outsiders are blind to it. Caleb, you will ride with me. The others will stay here, under protection." Clara stepped forward, her mind already calculating. "We can't allow them near the town. If they pass the ridge, they risk confrontation with civilians. We need strategy, not just strength." Rose handed Caleb a map. "Northern Ridge, Canyon Pass. They'll try to flank. Watch their approach. Timing and positioning will save lives more than a quick draw." Lily, standing slightly behind, gave him a small, encouraging smile. "I believe in you, Caleb. Just don't underestimate them." Caleb felt a surge of responsibility. This was no ordinary cowboy mission. This was about protecting the sisters he had pledged to honor. He nodded, letting the weight of the law settle in his mind like a second skin. They rode out together, Caleb flanking Margaret, who led with the calm authority that had impressed him from the start. Clara and Rose observed from behind, coordinating communication with townsfolk via signals and messengers. Lily stayed behind with some trusted townspeople, ready to help if the battle came too close to Red Mesa. The ridge was rugged and unforgiving. Loose rocks clattered beneath their horses' hooves, and the wind carried the distant sound of hooves and shouted orders. Caleb's heart raced, not with fear of dying, but with the fear of failing the 4 sisters, the trust he had promised to uphold under sacred law. The outsiders appeared first as dust clouds on the horizon, riding fast, weapons glinting in the morning light. Margaret's voice was steady. "Hold, let them approach. Do not act rashly. We strike when the moment favors us." Caleb followed her lead, adjusting his grip on the reins and scanning the terrain. He could see the outsiders' formation, noting their numbers, their spacing, their approach. Using what he had learned from Rose and Clara, he directed the horses and coordinated movement silently. The first shot rang out from an unexpected angle, warning more than a threat. Caleb's reflexes kicked in, positioning the sisters safely behind rock outcroppings while keeping the attackers in sight. "Steady," Margaret instructed. "Courage is not recklessness. Watch and wait for the moment." Caleb realized that the Hartley Law had prepared him, in subtle ways. Patience, observation, and adaptability qualities drilled into him during days with the sisters were exactly what he needed now. Every small detail he had learned in the stables, in the market, and in the household mattered here. On the ridge, where a single miscalculation could cost lives, the confrontation escalated quickly. Shots rang out, dust and smoke mingling with the morning light. Caleb moved with precision, guiding Margaret and anticipating the attackers' maneuvers. He found openings, covering the sisters as they repositioned, communicating with signals he had only just learned from Rose. Every lesson from the past days became a lifeline in the chaos of the ridge. Finally, the attackers faltered. Caleb's quick thinking, combined with Margaret's leadership, Clara's strategy, Rose's precision, and Lily's vigilance from the town, turned the tide. The outsiders, realizing the Hartleys were not easy prey, retreated with frustration. Red Mesa's defenders emerged unscathed, though their hearts still pounded from the close call. As the dust settled, Caleb breathed deeply. He had faced countless dangers before: outlaws, storms, wild animals, but nothing had tested him like this. He had not only survived, he had protected the sisters, upheld the law, and proven that he could act as their defender without hesitation. Back at the mansion, the sisters gathered, each acknowledging his role in their survival. Margaret's nod was brief but approving. Clara offered a rare smile. Rose's eyes reflected admiration, and Lily's gentle touch reassured him that he had truly earned her trust. Caleb realized then that the law of the Hartleys was more than a family tradition. It was a living framework for courage, loyalty, and protection. By saving Lily, learning from her sisters, and facing the threat on the ridge, he had begun to embody what the law demanded. That night, as Caleb tended the horses by the flickering light of lanterns, he felt a quiet pride. The path ahead would bring more trials, more tests of trust and duty, but he also felt certainty. He would meet them head-on, bound by law, honor, and the unspoken promise he had made to the four sisters of Red Mesa. The weeks following the skirmish at the northern ridge passed in a whirlwind of duties, lessons, and subtle discoveries. Caleb Moore, once a lone cowboy roaming the deserts and canyons of the West, found himself deeply entwined in the rhythms of the Hartley household. Each day brought new challenges, new insights, and, most importantly, a growing understanding of the four sisters he had vowed to honor. Margaret remained the anchor of the family. Her presence was commanding yet measured, a steady current beneath the waves of chaos that occasionally threatened Red Mesa. Caleb rode with her frequently, observing her negotiations with townsfolk, her decisions about land management, and the unwavering authority she commanded without intimidation. Slowly, he learned the nuances of her strength, not just in action, but in foresight, patience, and moral clarity. One evening, as they walked the perimeter of the estate, she shared a rare piece of her inner world. "The law binds you to us, Caleb," she said quietly, eyes on the horizon. "But understand this, the law is more than rules. It is trust. Every action you take reflects not just on yourself, but on all of us. The moment you falter in integrity, you risk more than failure, you risk our hearts." Caleb absorbed her words, realizing that Margaret's strength was tempered by an acute awareness of responsibility. His respect for her deepened, not as a commanding figure but as someone whose convictions shaped the very life of the family. Clara, in contrast, revealed lessons of intellect and perception. She challenged Caleb daily, not with confrontation, but with questions that demanded reflection. While tending the estate or managing accounts, she would pose hypothetical dilemmas or point out subtle inconsistencies, encouraging him to think critically, act wisely, and anticipate consequences. Caleb often found himself surprised by the depth of her insight. "You observe well, but observation without understanding is useless," Clara once remarked after he had spotted a minor misalignment in the barn's construction. "Notice patterns, anticipate outcomes, and always ask why. That is how the law endures, and how those who serve it endure as well." With Rose, Caleb discovered the beauty in precision and care. Her meticulous attention to detail, whether in tending the gardens, maintaining the household, or managing the family's transactions, instilled in him a patience he had rarely practiced. Rose's lessons were subtle: a correction of his posture while planting seedlings, a gentle guidance on handling fragile items, but they shaped his actions profoundly. He began to see that the law's demands were not just for grand gestures or dramatic heroics, but for daily, consistent care that built trust and stability. And then there was Lily, the youngest, once fragile and dependent, now strong and perceptive. Caleb found that his protective instincts had grown into genuine affection, though he struggled to define it. Lily's guidance was often understated: a look, a touch, a whispered suggestion that carried weight far beyond its simplicity. She challenged him emotionally, teaching him empathy and the importance of sensitivity in matters of the heart. One afternoon, as they repaired a fence together, she paused, her hands resting lightly on his. "Cowboy," she said softly, "you've learned the law outside these walls, but have you learned it in here? In the hearts of the sisters you serve?" Caleb looked at her, recognizing the depth of her question. It was not about duty alone, it was about understanding, care, and connection. The law bound him, yes, but his loyalty, respect, and love for each sister had become something far more personal, more real. Yet the law's weight was never absent. Caleb felt the tension between duty and desire, between personal freedom and sacred obligation. Nights were restless, filled with reflection and quiet contemplation. How could he honor each sister individually, as their personalities, strengths, and vulnerabilities demanded, without faltering in his commitments? How could he navigate emotions that were entirely his own, yet intertwined with promises he had made under ancient law? The answers came slowly, revealed in moments of shared laughter, silent understanding, and mutual trust. Caleb began to anticipate Margaret's needs, appreciate Clara's insights, respect Rose's care, and cherish Lily's gentleness. He learned to act without hesitation, speak without offense, and observe without judgment. In each interaction, he found fragments of himself reflected back, reshaped by the influence of the Hartley sisters. One evening, as the sun dipped low over Red Mesa, casting the town in golden light, Caleb sat with all 4 sisters in the garden. Margaret's eyes were steady, Clara's thoughtful, Rose's meticulous, and Lily's tender. Caleb felt the bond fully, the law, the lessons, and the trust converging into a single unbreakable thread. He understood then that the sacred law was not merely a binding of duty, it was a binding of hearts, a covenant of mutual respect, honor, and shared strength. Caleb knew the road ahead would hold more trials, external threats, personal dilemmas, and the constant challenge of balancing obligation with emotion. Yet, in that moment, he felt prepared. He would not falter. He would not betray their trust. And in serving them, he would discover not only what the law demanded of him, but what he could give in return: loyalty, courage, and a heart capable of honoring for sisters as the land his own. The night fell quietly over Red Mesa, the stars glimmering above, and Caleb Moore finally allowed himself a rare, unburdened smile. He had found his purpose, his family, and his place. The law of the Hartleys was no longer a chenet, was a compass, guiding him toward honor, love, and belonging. The quiet of Red Mesa was shattered one evening by the distant thunder of hooves. Caleb Moore, tending to the stables with the practiced ease he had gained over weeks, paused as the sound grew closer. Dust spiraled on the horizon, carrying a sense of urgency and danger. Margaret appeared beside him, her expression unreadable. "They've returned," she said, stronger, more organized. "They've learned from their first attempt. Caleb, this is no longer a skirmish, it's a siege. We must act decisively." Clara stepped forward, a calculated glint in her eyes. "We know their patterns now. They'll try to divide us, to draw us into mistakes. But we are prepared. This time, every move must be precise. Caleb, you will coordinate with me. Your judgment will save lives." Rose quietly distributed weapons, checking each barrel with meticulous care, while Lily moved among the townsfolk, offering instructions and comfort to those who would be caught in the conflict. The Hartley household moved with the harmony of a well-tuned machine, every action deliberate, every role understood. And at the center of it all was Caleb, heart-pounding yet steady, fully aware that the sacred law demanded more than courage, it demanded wisdom, protection, and devotion. The attackers came in force, flanking from multiple directions. Dust and tension filled the air. Caleb mounted his horse, riding beside Margaret, and together they guided the defense with a combination of strategy, observation, and unyielding courage. Every lesson the sisters had taught him: the patience of Margaret, the insight of Clara, the precision of Rose, and the empathy of Lily was now his arsenal. Shots rang out, horses reared, and chaos threatened to overwhelm them. Caleb moved instinctively, placing himself between danger and the sisters whenever needed. When a rider attempted to breach the estate's perimeter, Caleb's sharp reflexes, guided by Rose's emphasis on precision, stopped him before harm could be done. He coordinated countermoves with Clara's foresight, predicting enemy strategies and redirecting their forces. Margaret's commanding presence bolstered everyone's morale, while Lily's gentle reassurance maintained calm amidst panic. Hours passed, and the battle reached its crescendo. One of the attackers managed to corner Lily near the edge of the estate, a clear and immediate threat. Caleb's heart surged. He had sworn to protect her, to uphold the law, and this was the ultimate test. Without hesitation, he spurred his horse forward, intercepting the attacker in a maneuver that required every ounce of skill, strength, and courage he possessed. The clash was brutal but brief. Caleb's years of survival in the wild, combined with the lessons from the Hartleys, allowed him to disarm and subdue the intruder. Lily's eyes, wide with relief and gratitude, met his, and in that instant, Caleb understood the true depth of the sacred law. It was not about fear, or obligation, or even survival. It was about trust, honor, and the unshakable bond between those who had sworn to protect one another. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the attackers, realizing their efforts were futile, retreated into the desert. The estate stood intact, the sisters safe, and Red Mesa preserved. Exhausted but resolute, Caleb dismounted and walked among the Hartleys, observing each sister in turn. Margaret's eyes softened, her nod acknowledging not only his skill but his unwavering commitment. Clara's analytical gaze held approval. Rose's meticulous attention reflected pride, and Lily's gentle touch on his arm conveyed something deeper than words, affection, and the certainty that he had earned his place. That night, around the hearth of the Hartley mansion, Caleb sat with the sisters, the firelight casting shadows that danced like memories of the day's trials. He realized that he had not only faced danger but had grown into the role the sacred law demanded. He had become protector, partner, and confidant, a man bound, not just by duty, but by heart and honor. Margaret spoke first, her voice steady. The law binds, yes, but it also reveals. You have demonstrated your strength, your wisdom, and your devotion. You honor us not by force alone, but by understanding and respect. Clara added, you have learned our ways, but more importantly, you have learned our hearts. That is the essence of the law. Rose's voice, precise and deliberate, echoed their sentiment. In every detail, in every choice, you have shown care and competence. That is the measure of a true Hartley protector. Finally, Lily's soft voice reached him, filled with emotion and warmth. Cowboy, you have risked everything for us. You have honored the law. And in doing so, you have honored us. You belong here, as much as we belong together. Caleb felt a swell of gratitude and resolve. The road to this moment had been long, fraught with trials both external and internal, but he had passed the ultimate test. The sacred law of the Hartleys was fulfilled, and he had proven himself worthy not through obligation alone, but through courage, understanding, and love. As the fire crackled and the stars shone over Red Mesa, Caleb more understood the full meaning of the law he had once questioned. It was not a burden, but a bond that bound him to 4 remarkable women, to a legacy of honor and strength, and to a life richer than any he had ever imagined in the wide, open West. The night was quiet, save for the whisper of the wind over the mesa. Caleb knew that challenges would come again, as they always did, but with the Hartleys at his side, with trust forged in fire and tempered by law, he was ready for whatever lay ahead. He had found his place, his purpose, and, most importantly, his heart.